Um, Jerky's not a disgusting habit because you can swallow it. I have heard stories probably like you of people that have tried to hide it and swallow their tobacco and like vomit, but I often tell our kids, when you chew jerky, it can last for a long time. Just chew it, suck it, let it go between your cheek and gum, and pull it out later and suck it some more. And it lasts for a long time. So this morning, on a little less gross note, I'm going to give you something that I pray that this next week and for the rest of our lives that you can think about it, meditate on it, chew it, and let it go into our hearts. Last November, something happened personally to me that's never happened with this intensity in my life, ever. Ever in I think Penny's 29, if I remember from last night. In my 29 years of being alive, it's never happened. God dropped a verse into my heart, and I can't shake it. Literally can't shake it. Cheryl asked me what I was going to speak about that day, and I said I'm not going to tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. So she hasn't. I've never told her this. But since mid-November last year, this verse has popped into my heart from 6 to 8, probably more like 30 to 40 times a day. It just, sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's quieter, sometimes it screams, and sometimes it doesn't. If you would like to this morning, I will show you what that verse is. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 13. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from the nations and place you where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Verse 13, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all of your heart. Let's pray. Father, let this verse come alive. Let us understand today that when you declare something, it's done. There is no when. It's a declaration. It's a promise. It's a commitment. And we know, God, you are not a God that lies, or you do not lead us astray. And you made that promise through Jeremiah that we will seek you and find you when we seek you with all of our hearts. Amen. There's two words there, seek and all. From us finding God, according to this, there's only two things that stand in our way. One is seek and one is all. We're not going to talk about seek today. We're going to talk about the word all. We have probably used the expression, I love you with all of my heart. I will tell you, Cheryl tells that to our cats. This morning, okay, I'm going to try to fight back the tears. Joshua came over to the house to do some computer work for us and brought his son over. He's 4 years old, our grandson. And I said, hey, Daniel, come here and give me a hug. And he went over instead, stood right next to Cheryl. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and said, no, Mandy's my favorite. So I did not tell Daniel today that I love you with all of my heart, because Daniel's heart is committed to someone else. But we often use the expression, I love you with all of my heart. I don't know if you remember your first Valentine to that special someone named Paula that I love you in 4th grade, and she never responded back. But I love you with all of my heart. People use the word all. When we were kids, we would go to our cabin, and my mom and dad's cabin, and Us as kids would just take off running, is full tilt, run right off the end of the dock and just fling ourselves into the water. We'd go completely underwater and we would be all wet. Now my mom, she would have to come down to the water and walk in slowly and get in her floating chair, and she'd only get wet up to here. Because once a week she went to August to get her hair done, and she couldn't get her hair wet, and she would put that hair thing on her. So, but in my mom's opinion, she was all wet, but she wasn't all wet. She was only partially wet. God said, all. How much is all? We'll take a look at that in a minute. But first, I want us to understand that when God, and I know we know this, but I don't know this as good as I should know it. When God makes a promise, He really, He keeps it. He really, really keeps it. And He really, really will keep this promise because He declared it. I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, and I can't remember who it was that said this, but he said the world has seen what happens when God gets a hold of a man, but the world has never seen what happens when a man gets a hold of God. Think about that for a moment. The world has seen what happens when God gets a hold of a man, but the world has never seen what happens when a man gets a hold of God. Personally, He's trying to do something in me. And I'm thinking about it. Because one statement, one sentence can change our life if we let it. I was sitting there thinking, hadn't thought about this. One sentence changed our family forever. Our history, our future, our heritage. And this was the statement. And some of you will probably remember this is Leonard Ravenhill. The opportunity of a lifetime must be seized during the lifetime of the opportunity. That's why we came to Pensacola, because of one sentence. We sold our house, 16 acres, and shut 2 businesses because we couldn't sell them and moved to Pensacola because of that statement. The opportunity of a lifetime must be seized during the lifetime of the opportunity. Our world is insane right now. You realize how close we are to getting the Equality Act passed? We need to pray. But in the midst of that chaos, we have an opportunity that we won't have in the future. We have an opportunity to seek Him with all of our heart. I guess we probably have 2 or 3 favorite verses that we all like, but one of my favorite verses in Luke, it's concerning the birth of Jesus. And it just simply said, concerning Mary, Jesus' mom, said, Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. I personally don't think Mary had a big mouth. I don't think she talked a lot. I think she's probably the most observant person that ever lived. One of, I should say. And I think she just watched. And I think she pondered, and she watched all the way to her son on the cross, and pondered, and pondered. Have you ever done, I don't even know if this is a word, but are you a ponderer? Here's a couple, I'll show you 2 people that got a hold of God. Genesis 3 talks about in the cool of the day, God would come down and talk to Adam and Eve. God talked to a man. And we could say, well, it was before they knew they were naked and all that. In Exodus 33, it says, God spoke face to face with Moses as a man speaks to his friend. Ponder that for a minute. Face to face, he talked to God. I mean, that was after the fall. That was just a guy. A guy. It could have been a gal, but it was just a guy. There's some guys here today. There's some gals here today. It could be us if we could get a hold of all. Think God talk to him face to face. And we know it. He glowed. He had to cover him. Face to face. Excuse me. Just pondering. Cheryl and I grew up in a city about 20 miles north of Detroit called Troy. It's 36 square miles, and because we grew up in that, we became accustomed to the roads. The city of Troy is divided into square miles. Every 36 square miles is in a square. So each road will be named 15-mile road, 16-mile road, 17, 18, 19, 20. So it's really easy. We moved to Pensacola, and I'm telling you, whoever designed, I think, smoked crack. I learned the word softly field. And they said, no, I don't mean softly field, I mean Michigan. Michigan? And then it goes north, and it goes south, and it goes east. This is one crazy roaded city, I'm telling you. Cheryl knows, I still have a difficult time getting around Pensacola. So we grew up in Troy, and because I think this is being broadcasted, these names are going to be changed. Not too far from Troy is another community. And it's a community, I'll just be real honest, that's rich, ridiculously filthy, not filthy, rich folks. It's like Burnham Woods on steroids. Maybe a small lot would be 5 acres. I became familiar with this area because I worked for a tree service in junior high and high school, and once a year we would go to this lady's house, and it would take 4 or 5 of us, all day long to trim her trees once a year. And she prepared, the reason I remember is she prepared the most amazing ham lunch for us. So if it takes 5 guys all day long to trim trees with cherry pickers and ropes and saddles, you know it's a big house. But there was a family in this community, and it was a man and his wife, godly people, good people. He was a pediatric neurosurgeon, and he loved his family, and he loved his daughter, but he was a very, very, needless to say, busy man. I don't know if you ever spent much time around doctors a lot. They're just, looks like they're preoccupied. The intelligence just oozes out of them. Some people even lose the ability to communicate. They're so intelligent. But he loved his wife, and he loved his family, and he would do anything for him. They had a daughter, her name was Mary, and he wanted to figure out what he could do for her that was real special. From time to time, not very often, they'd get a chance to go down to Detroit and watch the Detroit Tiger baseball game. Maybe once they went to the Lions game, but they just liked doing everything together. And because it was an only child and they had good money, it was hard for them not to spoil her or give her a lot of things. So one day he came up with an idea, because they have a huge house. It was a 2-story house. He thought, I'm going to do something special for her. So he said, Mary, I'm going to do something special for you, but you can't go upstairs. In the meantime, he liked to tinker with woodworking, so what he did was, in the minimum that he could, his wife and daughter weren't allowed to go upstairs, he converted a room upstairs to Mary's room. He had a locksmith come. It was a solid door. There was no glass in the door. He had a special lock put in the door with only one key, and it was a deadbolt. The only way you could get in was put the key in, turn it, and then you could go in on the other side. That you'd have to take the key and lock it. So he had that room designed for her. And in that room, he built all kinds of shelves, all kinds of different heights and tables and all kinds of stuff. Then one day he told Mary, he said, okay, it's ready. So he took her upstairs and he showed her this room. He said, Mary, this room is yours. Here's the key. No one will ever go in this room unless you want him to. Not me, not your mom, no one. This is your room. In fact, it's even so much your room. Look above the door, and above the door he'd made a sign that just said Mary's room. Mounted it on the door. So as years went by, that was her room. She would put everything she had in that room. No one ever went in that room except for her. She kept it locked. She hid the key in her jewelry box in her bedroom. And no one would ever go in that room except for her. And of course, all the memorabilia from Disney World trips, and oh my goodness, there's a lot of memorabilia from Disney World. You can put in that room on the shelves, and just she had it all set up, decorated. And no, her mom and dad had no idea what was in that room. So time went by, and Mary got to be a freshman in high school. And this, I can't tell you, Cheryl will remember, it wasn't even a city, this community, they had their own Institute of Arts. They had their own horseback riding stable. They had their own golf course. This lady we worked for lived on the golf course. They had their own swimming pool. I mean, you name it. This was it. She would walk to school, and as she would walk to school, along the way, she would pick up a few friends as she walked to school. So she would walk to school, and friends would gather with her. You know, her dad would always be gone when she would get up, and she would come home, and he would still be gone. They didn't spend that much time together, but they loved each other. So somehow, the love balanced out the making kids go crazy like they kind of do when they don't get the right kind of affection. So it was a good family. Her dad was known for, because he was a pediatric neurologist, he always wore neckties that had cartoon characters on it, like Sesame Street and Mickey Mouse. And the kids, you know, a doctor walks in with something on a tie like that and no sport coat. Instantly, the kids are attracted to him. So one day, Mary, and I will try to tell you this without breaking down, but Mary walked to school one day with her friends. It was a nice spring day. And as she was walking to school, she got up and everything was normal around the house. She went to school, and as she was walking home, she had like 3 friends that she walked with, and they would just drop off on their house, and then she would finish her last walk on the way home. So she just heard her friend, and as she started heading towards her house, she heard sirens. She noticed noises in the distance and sirens, and she thought, well, like us, it's like, wonder what's that's about. So she dropped her friend off, and as she got to the street where she turns right to go down her street, she got to the corner, and she realized that all those sirens were at her house. Fire trucks and police cars. And as she walked around the corner, she saw an ambulance with its lights on just flying 90 to nothing down the street. So she took off running and got home. And her mom and a couple of neighbors were standing on the front porch. And she was just a freshman in high school. She didn't know what happened. So she ran home and said, Mom, and her mom was all white in the face, and she just said, Mary, it's your dad, he's had a heart attack. Her dad didn't recover. He died later that night. Devastated that community, just tore that community up. I mean, I don't know how old he was, but it devastated the community. So needless to say, the funeral service was very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. It was at their church, and the funeral service was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And after the funeral, there was probably few hundred, I don't know how many people, there were a lot of people because he was a very well-known man at the local hospital. They came over to the house for a late, or I guess it'd be early supper, late lunch. And lots, of course, she had it, that's a lifestyle that most of us don't grasp. Everything was catered. She didn't have to do much. So it was beautiful. It was outside. It was a beautiful spring day. It made me think about it the other day. It was like it was 80 degrees. We were outside working. It was like, oh man, this is spring. It was beautiful, beautiful spring day, and people just lingered and gave their apologies and told Mary and hugged her mom. And so all the friends began to trickle away. The sun was starting to set, and Mary's mom was the last name was Smith, and she was trying to get composure to herself, and she was kind of walking around the yard and looking, and the catering company said all left and said they'd be back the following day to clean up the yard and get the tables and chairs and everything. Mary's mom noticed that Mary was gone. Sun had gone down. She just called her like you are. Mary, nothing. Mary, nothing, nothing. She walked through the first door of the house to the kitchen and stuff, nothing. She went upstairs, looked in their bedroom, nothing. Nothing, dead silence. Mary, she walked over to the room that her dad had built for her and pushed on the door, nothing. Locked shut. She knocked on the door and said, Mary, nothing. So her mom stood there for a minute and thought, well, what's going on? And she knew that her friends had come to the service and come over for dinner. They had gone home with their families, and all the relatives gone in. No relatives were staying there, so she thought, she's got to be in there. She started knocking. Mary, Mary. She leaned up against the door and knocked. Mary, this is Mary. Knocked and knocked and knocked. She said she has no idea how long she knocked. Knocked and knocked and knocked and knocked and knocked. Nothing. Silence. Knocked and knocked. In fact, right now my knuckles are starting to burn a little bit. She knocked and knocked and knocked and nothing. Big solid wooden door locked. Nothing. Special room for Mary. Nothing. After a while, she was, needless to say, from the emotions, just exhausted. And the knocking slowed. And the tears, she ran out of tears. She just cried all day long. She cried for 3 days in preparation for the funeral, and just cried all day long. And now her little daughter has locked herself in her room and won't let anybody in. She's knocking and she's knocking and knocking and she's knocking. And she looked, and blood was starting to trickle down out of her knuckles on her hand from knocking so long. Knocking, 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 nothing. So she slowly sunk to the floor out of exhaustion. She doesn't know if she was awake or asleep, she said, and just slept on the floor. What do you do if nobody will let you in? There's a key, and it's on the inside, and nobody will let you in. You don't want to call 911 on your freshman daughter. You know she's in there. You know her whole world has been destroyed. The favorite person in her life, and she can't get in. Sometime early in the morning, it was still dark, it was late. Mom was leaning up, slouched up against the door, and semi-sleep, semi-awake, and she just heard a click. And the door opened, and there stood Mary. Her mom stood up, wrapped her arms around her, and they just wept. No tears, because there was no tears left. They just wept. Nobody talked. Nobody said nothing. They just stepped into the room and sat down. There's lots of things that we would have said, but all her mom said is, Mary, we'll get through this together. You let me in. We'll get through this together. In that day that you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. If you think about it, our hearts are divided into hundreds and hundreds and thousands maybe of doors. A lot of them may be open. Some of them may not. A week ago yesterday, we had a worker guy. I don't want to tell you because I don't want you to try to figure out who it is. Worker guy come to our house, and he stood in our kitchen, just chewing the fat. And all of a sudden, he stopped and got quiet, and he said, my family threw me away. And he started crying. And he said, but this other family took me in and loved me. And he married one of the daughters, and they have 2 beautiful kids, and he's a youth pastor because he opened the door and let somebody in. Revelation 3:20 said, let me in. Not that door. I'm not opening that door. What's on the piece of wood above the door in your heart that you won't open? I am so tempted right now just to start ripping off what it could be. But Jesus said, when he comes, he will convict the world. What's on the door? Maybe nothing. Maybe your door is, all the doors of your heart are completely wide open. Then if they are, have you found God? The way this scripture says that we can find him. All of our heart. I will tell you honestly, when this verse screams the loudest to me is when I start going down a bad road. Here a few weeks ago, we were with some family and friends. You know, I was standing there, I could feel my attitude start going. And my insides were just screaming. Man, I wanted to blast that. When you seek me, screamed in my heart. You see, when I'm talking about me now. I don't know when I get attitudes, that's not all. When I get attitudes, it's like slamming that door shut and saying, get out of here, Jesus. For me it is. Then I stood there and thought, okay, close your eyes and just focus. You know how things can get obnoxious? Have you thought about that? For over 2,000 years, he's been knocking. Why don't we just let him in? Just let him in. But I'll tell you something else. It can be really painful. But it's also really healing. In this world that with all the insanity and craziness that's going on, we need to take a few moments and just focus. Are we letting him in to all of our heart? Can you imagine next Sunday if we're all standing here talking and somebody walks through that door back there, stops and get a shot of hand sanitizer, and we look at them and their face is glowing? Wow. He or she has been with God. He said that. He declared that. You can find me when you seek me with all your heart. For the next few minutes, here's what I'd like us to do. We're going to play a song. It's not going to be over because it's Billy Graham's song, Just As I Am. And when this, last November, when this started rolling around inside, I've been waiting for this day because I'm going to respond to my own altar call. Because there's a door in my heart, and I'm not going to tell you what's above it because I would be embarrassed. And I'm going to go right over there in that chair, and I'm going to kneel. And here's why I like to kneel. Because when I kneel and I close my eyes, then I can't see what's going on around me. Movement catches my eye. You know, like, what was that? What was that? And I'm going to close my eyes so I can't see what you or what's going on around here. And I'm going to, in my mind, visualize. And I'm on the inside. And I just take a key and say, nothing. I don't have to do the talking. He said, I will come in and I will eat with you and I will drink with you. And it's going to be okay because you let me in. So this morning, I want to encourage you. You can stay where you are. If you want, bow your heads. If you don't, if you want to spread out and find a place of prayer, we'll listen to this song and then I'll close in prayer. And the reason it's going to be a little bit short of a prayer time, it's just as I am. It's not that long of a song. is because it could start here, but where it really starts for me is when somebody criticizes my work. Don't criticize the way I cut grass. It does not go well. It's just like slamming that door. It's like, oh boy, oh boy. It just certain things that probably you have certain things that'll trigger you and set you off to no end. And it's just like slamming that door. I need to keep that door open. Take a few minutes, if we will, and we listen to this song. And I want to encourage you as I turn this off because I don't want you to know